Good evening. My name is Nathan Cooper, and I am a sixth grade student at Benton Middle School. This is my first year in Future Kings, and I am in the game design program. Cornell William Brooks is a Hauser Professor of the Practice of Nonprofit Organizations, a Professor of the Practice of Public Leadership and Social Justice at the Harvard Kennedy School. He is also director of the William Monroe Trotter Collaborative for Social Justice at the School Center for Public Leadership and visiting professor of the practice of prophetic religion and public leadership at Harvard Divinity School. Mr. Brooks is the former president and CEO of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, NAACP, a civil rights attorney, and an ordained minister. Mr. Brooks was most recently a visiting professor of social ethics, law, and justice movements at Boston's University School of Law and School of Theology. He was a visiting fellow and director of the Campaign and Advocacy Program at the Kennedy School's Institute for Politics in 2017. Mr. Brooks served as the 18th president of the NAACP from 2014 to 2017. Under his leadership, the NAACP secured 12 significant legal victories, including laying the groundwork for the first statewide legal challenge to prison-based gerrymandering. He also reinvigorated the activist social justice heritage of the NAACP, dramatically increasing membership, particularly online and among millennials. Among the many demonstrations from Ferguson to Flint during his tenure, he conceived and led America's Journey for Justice March from Selma, Alabama to Washington, D.C., over 40 days and 1,000 miles. Prior to leading the NAACP, Mr. Brooks was president and CEO of the New Jersey Institute for Social Justice, where he led the passage of pioneering criminal justice reform and housing legislation, 6 bills in less than 5 years. He also serves as senior counsel and acting director of the Office of Communication Business Opportunities at the Federal Communications Commission, executive director of the Fair Housing Council of Greater Washington, and a trial attorney at both the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights under Law in the U.S. Department of Justice. Mr. Brooks served as judicial clerk for the Chief Judge Sam J. Irving III on the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Fourth Circuit. Please help me welcome Mr. Brooks to the podium.
Good evening. Now, because I know that you have been inspired and well-fed, I'm going to say good evening again, and I want you to say it just loud enough for every future king in this room to hear you. Good evening. Good evening. I first begin with a word of appreciation to Dr. King for affording me the opportunity to be in this place at this time. It has been my humbling privilege and honor to meet with presidents and a prime minister. But in the course of my civil rights career, I have never had the opportunity to be in the presence of so many kings at one time on one occasion. So can you put your hands together for every future king in the room? To all of the award recipients, to all of the organizers, to all of the sponsors, to all of those who worked so hard, so long, so harmoniously to put together, to engineer this event. Can we put our hands together for all of them? I would be remiss if I did not, as a minor king, take a moment to lift up a word of appreciation to my queen, Miss Janice Boone Brooks. We have as our special guest tonight a friend of ours for going on, I would say the number of years because my wife insists upon being perennially 29. I won't say the number of years, but for many years, the Reverend Kimberly Young. Just appreciate you being here. So if you don't mind, I'd like to just begin with a funny story that illustrates the degree to which I'm appreciative of being here tonight. As I mentioned, that I've had a chance to meet with the President, White House, and meet at least one Prime Minister. But if I can be honest with you, I've not always been so fortunate to be in the presence of such distinguished people, to be in the presence of so many kings. In fact, I can think of a time many years ago when I found myself as a young, naive, innocent preacher in London, England on a Sunday morning. As a young, innocent, naive preacher standing outside of a cathedral in London on the sidewalk, I looked at this beautiful cathedral with spires soaring up toward the heavens, stained glass windows reflecting the iridescent, multicolored beauty of God. And as a young, innocent, naive preacher, I assumed that there were 2,000 or so people inside of this cathedral waiting to hear this young, naive preacher preach. Now, I made my way into the sanctuary, and I immediately noticed the obvious, the pastor and exactly 2 members. Now, this is a true story. So now I did what I was taught to do, which is to say that you speak, you share, you preach to 2 people in the same way that you would to 2,000. So I made my way to the pulpit, which was this rather august, ornate architectural affair, which literally soared at least a story and a half into the air. And so I climbed to the top of this ornate pulpit and I began to preach. And I immediately noticed the obvious, that the member I'll call Miss Jones immediately fell asleep. True story. This only inspired me to speak and preach with greater conviction. And I immediately noticed the obvious, that the member I'll call Miss Smith, she seemed to hang on to every word I had to say. She said amen at all the right liturgical moments. She said hallelujah at all the right sermonic moments. And I thought to myself, at least I'm reaching somebody on this Sunday morning. So I made my way out of the pulpit, made my way to the side of the pastor, and the pastor said to me, Brother Brooks, I'm just so sorry. You know, Miss Jones falls asleep on everybody. And Miss Smith is out of her mind and did not understand the thing you had to say. So you can see why I'm just so delighted to be in the midst of such an august, distinguished, and esteemed audience filled with future kings. Tonight, we find ourselves in a morally poignant, history-laden moment in our times. We find ourselves in this moment caught between trouble and travail, between the Charybdis and this moment. We find ourselves in a moment in which all across the length and breadth of our republic, we have a generation of young men, young women, children, future kings, future queens, future royalty of this republic. We find ourselves in a moment in which all across the length and breadth of this country, the youngest citizens of the republic are facing grave dangers to this democracy. We saw only a few years ago, in the wake of George Floyd's death, not the oldest among us, not merely the wisest among us, but the youngest among us, the most courageous among us, the most bold and daring and powerful among us, future kings and future queens standing up for democracy, standing up for justice, middle schoolers and high schoolers literally leading the way. And in this moment, in Memphis, Tennessee, we see young people marching for their lives, standing against gun violence. And so we find ourselves in this moment, in this banquet hall, assembled with future kings. This is an unusual moment in American history. It is a moment in history when voting rights are certainly challenged. A moment in history in which gun violence seems to hold reign. It's a moment in history where some of the most troublesome and nettlesome and difficult problems of conscience and conviction and country are presented to us. And yet we find ourselves in this place with a group of young men who represent a standard of unrelenting and unapologetic excellence. And so somebody somewhere in this audience might be asking the question, are we here as a matter of happenstance? Are we here as a matter of coincidence? Are we here as a matter of circumstance? Why are we here in this moment? Is this a matter of some random moment on the Gregorian calendar? Are we simply here because we had nothing better to do? I believe that we're in this room at this time, standing in support, in solidarity with these future kings because we've been called to be. I'm not talking about the chimes on your iPhone that wake you up in the morning. I'm not talking about that old-fashioned alarm clock that ring and ding. I'm not talking about your mother or your father waking you up way too early in order to go to school. I'm talking about an alarm clock of history. The chimes of history that are yet ringing and reverberating and resonating in our hearts in this very moment. We as parents, we as awardees, we as sponsors, we as conveners and organizers of this event on this occasion, we as members of the school board, we as elected officials, we as a superintendent of a school district, we as teachers, we as believers in future kings have been called to be. So the people around you, they're not here by happenstance, not here by circumstance, not here by coincidence, but we are here on purpose. And so I just want to lift up a few themes for future kings. I'm not sure if I'm up to the task. I'm not sure if I'm even qualified to be in the company of those who are leading, not with respect to the future, but they're leading now. If you heard the power of the public speech before I made my way to the podium, if you saw the poise demonstrated behind this podium, if you saw the way in which these young men held themselves so erect that their dignity was manifest and clear and powerful, you may like me, you may suspect that they are operating like all of us under some kind of a calling. And so I just want to lift up three calls. This may seem strange and unusual and perhaps theologically and circumstantially and historically inappropriate, but I just want to lift up three calls. The first of which is the call to serve. I suspect these young men are operating under a call to service. Secondly, a call to excellence. And thirdly, a call, don't be nervous, don't be trepidatious, don't be anxious, but a call to power. I might note in the presence of so many who are enamored by engineering and science and technology and math, so many who are enamored by propulsion engineering and aeronautical engineering and nanotechnology and artificial intelligence, machine learning, and algorithmic calculations, that I might note that there's a bit of moral philosophy, there's a bit of narrative philosophy that you might find interesting tonight. That's just another way of saying, may I tell you a story? Once upon a time, there was a book. The Christians call it Bible. Jewish people call it the Torah. People of the Muslim faith call it the Quran. Those three religions were called people of the book. But there's a story about a young man, round about your age. His name was Samuel. And Samuel was asleep. Samuel had a mama who, like these mothers here, was so confident, so believing in her child, she dedicated her child to God. And so Samuel was sent off, if you will, to a boarding school. I'm not talking about Brentfield High. I'm not talking about one of the other wonderful schools in Prince William County, but Samuel was sent to live and to study in the temple. And Samuel was sleeping in the midnight hour, and he heard his name 4 times. Samuel, 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 Samuel. Some of you in this room may have heard your name that many times. Robert, 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 Jamal, Jamal, Jamal. Some young man in this room has heard your name several times in a row. Most of the time when you've been behaving well, but occasionally when you've not behaved well. Sometimes parents kind of stutter. You know, they just repeat themselves. You don't have to act like you know what I'm talking about, young man, but sometimes parents just think, anybody ever had your parents like call your name too many times? I'm just asking. Don't have to raise your hands. Don't have to admit, but you know how parents, they just stutter. They have your name on the tip of their tongue and they keep repeating it. So Samuel heard his name 4 times. And on the last time, he answers God and he accepts his call. Now some future king is asking, well, why would this be relevant to me? In the Bible, before there were kings, there were judges. Samuel was called before there were kings. And the Bible tells us that he was a judge, he was a prophet, he was a leader. So I'm just trying to suggest to you that in his calling, before he became a widely recognized leader, he was a boy. He had a call to serve. Someone's asking the question, well, I'm enamored of drone technology. I'm enamored of cybersecurity. How does that reflect? How does that manifest or demonstrate or make clear a call to service? I want to suggest to you that anytime you are called out, anytime you're called apart, anytime you're set aside and set apart, lifted up for other people to respect, for other people to admire, for other people to look up to. Some young man in this room has a little brother. Some young man in this room has a younger sister. Some young man in this room has little children who are looking up to you. You've been called to serve. Well, I know some young man saying, well, wait a minute, that's too heavy a burden to bear. I'm only in 6th grade. I'm only in 7th grade. I'm only in 8th grade. I'm only in 9th grade or 10th grade or 11th grade or the 12th grade. What do you mean? People admiring me? People expecting me to lead? Yes. Because I don't need the parents to hear this. Y'all close your ears. You don't need to hear this. This is confidential information for the young kings in the room. When you walk, when you speak in the world, your voice reverberates. It commands respect. And adults sense your power, they sense your call, they sense your anointing, and they look up to you. The youngest leaders in our society did not begin as old men. You recall there was an elder statesman by the name of John Lewis. John Lewis wasn't always an elder statesman. John Lewis wasn't always this historic titan striding through history. John Lewis was a 15-year-old, 16-year-old high schooler. When he wrote letter after letter, let me transliterate that. He DM'd Dr. King again and again. Hit him up on Twitter. He DM'd him. He emailed. He texted him. And he said, Dr. King, I want you to come to my high school. I want you to help me fight social injustice at my high school. What I'm suggesting to you is that your calling to serve comes early. You see, this is notion that somehow you got to wait till you're old enough to have your own checking account. There's this notion that somehow you have to wait to be old enough to drive. There's this notion that somehow you have to be old enough to have a social security check, gray hair or no hair, and look like your parents or grandparents before you're called. That's not historically accurate. The call to serve begins now. The call to inspire, the call to literally be an example and a role model for others. Why? Because there's something I call the eloquence of example. Even if you're not a public speaker, even if you never stand behind a podium, even if you never lift up your voice in song, even if you're never a popular young man in school, there is an eloquence of example. That is to say, your behavior speaks for you. That is to say, your personal example is a witness for you. That is to say, people admire the way you study. People admire the way you walk. People admire the way you respect your parents. People admire the way you lead in the world. People admire the fact that you're here on a weekend talking about leading in technology, leading in STEM. People admire you. And you have no idea how much power you have. I also want to suggest to you that there's a call to excellence. You know, in the world, there is among some a low standard of mediocrity. Half do is half done. There's a standard of mediocrity that suggests that you need not study, you need not respect your parents, you need not respect yourselves, you need not respect your own sense of dignity, you need not respect your own vision of yourself. But I want to suggest to you that there was a fella by the name of Daniel. Daniel got himself in trouble, found himself in a hot place. But Daniel had a reputation for excellence. You see, when I come to this podium and I see young men who are taller than I am, who have voices deeper than mine in the 6th grade, I'm jealous. Right? And then when I see a young man barely able to see over the podium, and I hear the way you speak, I see the way you carry yourself, I want to suggest to you that there is a calling of excellence on your life. Excellence means that you study when other people sleep. Excellence means that you read when other people, I'm using sign language. Excellence means that you see school as a pathway to opportunity. Excellence means that you have a sense of your own character and integrity. Excellence means that you tell the truth, that your word is your bond. Excellence means that you treat people your age with respect and you treat people older than you with even more respect. That's not old-fashioned, that's new and improved and powerful. It's a calling of excellence on your life. When it comes to technology and science, they are notoriously amoral. Science and technology can be used for good or evil. There are algorithmic programs that calculate risk assessments that damn children to the bowels of the juvenile justice system. There are ways in which science is used to propagate a facial recognition technology that means black and brown men are disproportionately, unfairly, and immorally picked up. That's technology too. And in fact, when we think about artificial intelligence can subvert common sense. Artificial intelligence can put those who are on the forefront of artificial intelligence out of work. But what I heard tonight was an excellent vision of STEM. What I heard tonight, what I saw tonight, were young men thinking about the ways in which drones can deliver goods and services. What I heard tonight were the ways in which technology can be used to improve our lives, serve our lives, make our communities better, make our futures brighter. What I heard tonight was a dedication to an excellence of not only mind, but heart. Excellence. There will be people who ask you to make apologies for working so hard, for studying so hard. But may I tell you, that young man was kind enough to read my resume. And it is true, I went to an HBCU, Jackson State University. It is also true that I went to Yale Law School, where I was on the Law Review, or what we call the Yale Law Journal. It is also true I went to Boston University School of Theology, where I was a Martin Luther King scholar. But what was not said was that I graduated from Head Start. What was not said is that I went to public schools. What was not said is that my grandmother, Miss Rosalie Prelo, preached day in and day out a moral and intellectual excellence. What wasn't said, what wasn't lifted up in my resume was that I got a standard of excellence from my mama and my daddy, my grandma and my grandpa, my aunts and my uncles, my family and my friends, and yes, future kings. You see, there's an excellence that can't be measured by your GPA. There's an excellence that can't be measured by your place on the honor roll. There's an excellence that can't be measured by an AP program or an IB program, or whether or not you go to a state school, a public school, a private school, an HBCU, or the Ivy League. There's an excellence that comes from the inside and moves to the outside and changes the world. So it's not about just how high you graduate in your class. It's not about merely what schools you go to. It's not about your GPA or your median income. It's about the excellence that you bring to this world. Lastly, you have a calling to power. This is a contentious and controversial thesis. I believe that young people are called to power. You're not called to generational deference, deferring to anybody and everybody who's older than you simply because they're older than you. You're not called to sit on your opinions all day long simply because you're younger or the youngest person in the room. You're called to power. You're called to walk through the world like you have authority. You're called to speak up, to speak out, and make your voices heard in the corridors of power. This country will not change as a consequence of generational inevitability. You will occasionally hear people of my age and my vintage who will say, not particularly thoughtfully, "Oh, I have so much hope in young people. They will make things better." Well, it is true, they will make things better. If we support young people, if we get behind young people, if we support their ideas, if we invest in young people, if we pray for young people, if we care for young people, and we treat young people as though they have power. One of the ways in which you demonstrate power is when you get the chance to vote, vote. And I'll tell you one little story and I'll take my seat. When I was president and CEO of the NAACP, I led a march from Selma, Alabama, the home of the Voting Rights Act, to Washington, D.C., the seat of our democracy. 40 days and 1,003 miles, with us walking every step of the way. And what I found on that march was the people who were often in the lead were literally middle schoolers and high schoolers. And so we marched literally from Selma, Alabama, all the way to Prince William County, Virginia, right outside. And when we came to the border of this county, I was walking beside a 78-year-old veteran whose chosen name was Middle Passage. And we marched 900 miles together in support of voting rights. And when we came to the border of Prince William County, this veteran who carried the American flag in support of the right to vote and support of the NAACP, this veteran noticed that raindrops were falling from the sky, that it began to mist and rain, and he, out of respect for the flag, rolled up the flag and protected it from the elements. But when the rain stopped, when the clouds parted, when the sun began to shine, my friend, Middle Passage unveiled, unrolled, unfurled the flag. And as he did so, he dropped to the pavement. My hardest day as president of the NAACP was explaining to a group of young people that Middle Passage died marching, walking for the right to vote. But the hardest question I was ever asked at the NAACP came from a group of young people who asked the question, if a man was willing to march and die for the right to vote, why can't we vote and fight for the right to vote? So, future kings, that crown rests on your head, not metaphorically, not symbolically, but literally. That crown rests on your head because you are powerful. That crown rests on your head because you have authority. That crown rests upon your head because you walk in the midst of generational expectation. That crown rests upon your head because we expect and believe and know that you will lead. You will lead in STEM. You will lead in office. You will lead in this democracy, and you will lead. Now I'll simply close with this benedictory note. At the beginning of this program, I heard a few words from a hymn that were well known to me. Lift every voice and sing. What you may not realize is Lift Every Voice and Sing was not written for adults. It was written for future kings and future queens, because the authors of this beautiful hymn wrote it on the 100th anniversary of the birth of Abraham Lincoln for an elementary school in Florida. They wrote the words of two brothers wrote these words. James Weldon Johnson and his brother Rosamond Johnson wrote the words and wrote the lyrics and wrote the music for Lift Every Voice and Sing, not for the parents, not for the grandparents, but literally they wrote the song for a children's program at a school in Florida. So it wasn't the adults, it wasn't the old people who first heard these words. It was literally future kings and future queens. And if you don't believe me, all you have to do is go to the Beinecke Rare Book Library on the campus of Yale University, and buried in the bowels, in the archives of that library, are a few faded pieces of parchment on which you will find these words. Lift every voice and sing till earth and heaven ring. Ring with the harmonies of liberty. Let our rejoicing rise high as the listening skies. Let it resound loud as a rolling sea. Sing a song full of the faith that the dark past has taught us. Sing a song full of the hope that the present has brought us. Facing the rising sun of our new day begun. Let us march on, let us march on, let us march on till victory is won.
Mr. Brooks, thank you for such a powerful word. Thank you very much. Mr. Brooks and Dr. Gregory, could you please join me on the stage? Mr. Brooks, thank you so much for your words of wisdom, full of instruction, guidance, encouragement, and strength. On behalf of the Future Kings students, parents, staff, and board members, we would like to present you with the Distinguished Service Award. It reads, in recognition of your commitment to the development of young men of promise. The Future Kings are extremely grateful to you for your contributions in support of the 9th Annual Future Kings Gala, April 29th, 2023. Mr. Brooks, thank you.